Donald Trump is botching his campaign, just not in the way most political professionals are claiming. And the reason is actually much more interesting than they know. As in 2020, Trump is less focused on the substance of his class critique than he was in 2016. But the political experts, per usual, are focused elsewhere. To hear them tell it, Trump's extremely Trump-like performance at last week's National Association of Black Journalists Summit was somehow evidence he'd lost a step. Of course, literally everything that happened on that stage could have been ripped straight out of his 2015-2016 primary campaign when Trump somehow managed to win the Electoral College despite being a reality TV host up against a former Secretary of State. And let's ask ourselves again, why was that? A lot of reasons, of course, just like any campaign, but winning Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania mattered as much as anything. And Donald Trump won that so-called, quote, blue wall because of his appeal to the white working class, balanced with Clinton's lack of appeal to a lot of people. And of course, there were high levels of support for Trump in the suburbs relative to 2020. Biden had fewer elite vulnerabilities than Hillary Clinton did. He also had more appeal with black voters, and he had a version of Trump who was distracted, although perhaps reasonably so in some cases, by issues that aren't kitchen table matters for his Rust Belt voters. Our friends Glenn Greenwald and Lee Fang recently noticed this as well. Glenn, on his show, System Update, noted that Trump's genius in 2016 involved throwing out the partisan binary in favor of an anti-establishment versus pro-establishment binary. Lee made a pretty persuasive argument that personnel changes could be a major factor. Let's listen to that.
2024 Trump campaign is sounding a little bit like the 2012 Mitt Romney campaign, where instead of talking about the job losses and the deference to big banks and big business interests from the Obama administration's first 4 years, the Romney campaign was only talking about this kind of typical, Obama's a far left progressive. He's an extremist leftist. Why isn't he engaging in more wars? This kind of neoconservative critique.
Matthew Stoller also sees Bannon's current imprisonment and lack of influence over the Trump campaign as a major factor. Writing on Trump back in June for his newsletter Big, one of my favorites, Stoller described the results of an experiment he conducted. Quote, I decided to listen to 3 recent speeches and compare them to what Trump said in 2016 and what he did on antitrust and trade while in office, Stoller wrote. What I found was surprising. In 2016, Trump feuded incessantly with corporate America, telling a story about big business as part of the corrupt establishment trying to outsource jobs and replace American workers with cheap labor. His post-presidential years have seen a different figure. He just doesn't talk about corporate America very much anymore. Something has changed, and I'm, Stoller said, going to try and identify that change and understand its significance. So what about now? In 2024, Stoller wrote, Trump took a pro-corporate turn. For instance, says Stoller, he asked his supporters to stop boycotting Brazilian conglomerate-owned Budweiser after the beer giant engaged in progressive-friendly marketing tactics. This shift was not a one-off. In office, he had been fiercely anti-China and even issued an executive order banning TikTok. But earlier this year, after meeting with libertarian, quote, never Trump billionaire Jeff Yass, part owner of TikTok, Trump reversed his position. In office, Trump personally hated crypto, preferring the dollar, but after meeting with crypto executives a month ago, Trump has pledged he'll support the industry. Now, that was long, but it was worth reading in full because Stoller really did go deep in comparing old Trump speeches with new ones. And after watching recent speeches, Stoller concluded, what's fascinating is that Trump doesn't criticize big business and doesn't talk much about jobs going to China and Mexico, though he does talk about tariffs. Instead, Trump has a couple of new themes. First, he argues that the war in Ukraine wouldn't have happened if he had been in office, and more broadly, global leaders like Xi Jinping respected him in a way they don't respect Biden. Second, he complains nonstop about electric cars. Third, he is now making arguments about gender questions like trans people playing in sports. Finally, he often talks about drilling for more fossil fuels, tax cuts, and deregulation. In other words, Trump sounds like he is the coalition leader of the Republican establishment. So this compare and contrast exercise from Stoller leaves us with a lot to distill. I'd say Trump does still couch a lot of these arguments in populist terms. For example, his decision to flip on TikTok. And there's a legitimate argument to be made that banning TikTok would, for example, boost the political establishment. On Budweiser, even Shane Gillis and Peyton Manning are comfortable boosting the brand these days. There are also important pro-crypto arguments from anti-establishment types who disagree with Matt and probably me on the issue too, and we hear those from Trump. But I think what's critical about Matt's exercise in this compare and contrast, early Trump versus current Trump, is the proportionality. Trump really needs a coherent, dominating, anti-elite message on foreign policy, big business, and culture. Fair trade, fair immigration, fair wages. That's what builds trust and confidence in the Rust Belt, and it's what balances interest in Trump versus interest in Kamala Harris in the suburbs. It could even actually eat away at Democrats' margins with Black and Hispanic voters, which were consequential to Biden's 2020 win and Hillary Clinton's 2016 loss. Trump doesn't have to be, quote, disciplined in the sense a lot of talking heads think, and of course the consultants who send source quotes anonymously to those talking heads. He can call Kamala Harris crazy as much as he wants. He can insult journalists all day and post weird stuff on Truth Social all night and still win. And he can do all of that because people are legitimately very fed up with the political establishment in America, and they are so fed up that they're willing to vote for a guy many of them find kooky because he's at least pledged to, quote, drain the swamp. I don't know how many times people have to say that from 2016 until now for it to actually sink in with the political establishment. But as far as Trump's appeal with that absolutely key demographic of his voters that allowed him to win the Electoral College in 2016, he needs them to believe that he's going to drain the swamp. And this campaign isn't inspiring that confidence like it did 8 years ago. Thanks for tuning into the Undercurrents channel. Make sure to subscribe and go to undercurrents.tv, my new favorite website, for even more behind the scenes and premium content. I'll see you back here soon.